This is a thing called representation by regulated interaction. So first I'm going to look at some past arguments about video games art status and why I think they're fundamentally kind of barking up the wrong tree. Then I'm going to have a little closer look at avatars and the role they play in the player experience. Then I've got a case study for you. I'm going to have a look at the game Batman Arkham Asylum, which I'm sure many of you have played, and a particular scene from that which I think exemplifies the representational tool that I'm going to be describing. And then finally I'll talk a little bit more about how representation by regulated interaction might work and how it might be used to make video games better and more interesting, not that they aren't already. So, here's the big question. Are video games art? So I think the question, are video games art, has been approached pretty much consistently in the same kind of way. Here's three published philosophical opinions on that question. Grant Taverner in his book The Art of Video Games, Aaron Smuts, that should say 2005, and Don Lopez in his very good book A Philosophy of Computer Art, all kind of approach the question in the same sort of way, which is essentially they find a theory of art that they find compelling, or they do a broad overview of popular theories of art and show how certain video games very comfortably fit into those theories of art. So here's a little example. So you might choose a video game that you think is a very compelling example of an artistic video game. There's one, BioShock. Then you might choose a theory of art. There's a few theories of art. And then what you do is you'd see whether the video game that you'd chosen matched up to any or all of the theories of art that you'd selected, and usually you'll come out as a yes. That'll come out as yes. So yes, you found out that BioShock is indeed a work of art. But is that really what we were asking when we were asking the question, are video games art? All we've learned is that BioShock is an artwork. What we haven't learned is that BioShock is a work of art because it's a video game. And I think that's really what we're asking when we ask whether video games are art. Sorry about that. This argument shows that some things that are artworks happen to be video games and not. This argument shows that some things that are artworks happen to be video games, but we also think, or some of us think, that some bits of blue tack, some unmade beds and some stacks of Brillo boxes are also artworks. So the fact that that bit of blue tack is an artwork doesn't say anything in particular about blue tack. So I don't know why. So there's no real reason to think that saying that BioShock was a video game in the way we just did says anything about video games. I think that what we really want to know is that artworks that are also video games are in some way artworks because they're video games. So how do we find out these reasons why video games might be artworks by virtue of some of their qualities of video games? Well, here, I think that might have something to do with avatars and their particular place in our engagement with video games. So here's an avatar that many of you, I'm sure, will know very well, Nathan Drake. So what does Nathan Drake do for you in your engagement with a video game? Well, in one sense, for one thing, he's your means of agency in the world. Avatars are your fictional proxies in the world of the video game. So if you want to act in a video game, you have to instruct, in some sense, Nathan Drake to act for you. They're also your means of epistemic access, or much of your means of epistemic access to the world of the video game. If you want to find out something about the world of the video game, if you want to find out the way a particular area is laid out, if you want to find out the tasks that you might have to accomplish to progress further in the plot, then you have to direct Nathan Drake to go and overhear a conversation perhaps, or explore a different area. If you want to find out things about the world, then you have to direct your avatar to do certain things. They can also, I think this point is crucial, avatars can also inform you about themselves. So by various different methods, you can find out certain things about avatars. You can find out their backstory. You can find out what they look like, most obviously. You can find out what they sound like. So visually, you can find out the colour of his eyes, which hand he holds a weapon, things like that. Audibly, you can find out details about Nathan Drake's accent, narrative elements of his backstory. Maybe they'll tell you if they're hungry, if they're injured, they might say ow. But there are some things that are represented to us about our avatar that aren't represented visually, audially, or there's also haptic representational mechanisms. So when the controller shakes, when Nathan Drake takes a bullet, that's a way of representing the fact that he's been hit. But there are some things that are represented to us about our avatar when we play, which aren't represented visually, audially, or haptically. And they're the kind of representations that I'd like to focus on. So I have a short video clip that I'm going to play for you from Batman Arkham Asylum, which I think exemplifies the kind of representation that I'm going to describe a little bit later on. And this is a scene that I'm sure will be familiar to anyone who's played the game. Hopefully this will work. Yeah. Could someone with a bit of Spanish maybe come and help me with this? There's a video clip here that I'm trying to get.
Did you move the video files onto the machine?
Yes, yeah.
But did you
press escape. Yeah, press escape. Okay. And then
This is going very well. Wait, if you just give me 1 second, I'll probably find it on YouTube. So this is the scene I'm going to find for you. Is for those of you who don't know, Batman is there we go. That's a badger. Here we go.
Oh no, I'm screwed.
So we had the voiceover there, but we'll get rid of that. So, oh God, okay. So apologies for that. Right, so at various points in this game, Batman is unwittingly poisoned by a hallucinogenic gas. So in this case, in this instance, he's walking down this corridor, which slowly transforms into a back alleyway, as you can see. Now, the thing I'd like you to pay attention to is the way Batman is walking down this corridor. This is the thing that. So, in response to your instruction to Batman to for Batman to move down this corridor, Batman carries out this instruction by, or the way your instruction to move for Batman to move is represented to you. These very powerful, kind of deliberate strides, as you can see very nicely there. Now, so the guy playing this doesn't do it the way I did. So, okay. So what's happening is the death of Batman's parents is being kind of relived. He's being forced to relive this nightmarish experience, and you can see there his. The avatar has changed. So up until this point, we had Batman walking very deliberately through this corridor, which is slowly turning into the nightmarish scenario. And now he's been turned. So visually, we have the representation of Batman here has changed to Bruce Wayne as a very young boy. But the crucial change here that I'd like to highlight is the way that the young Bruce Wayne avatar is walking now. So rather than powerful, deliberate strides you saw Batman making in response to your command to move forward, you now have this kind of resigned, shuffling motion. And something that doesn't really come across in the visual, in just watching it, is the fact that the young Bruce Wayne won't respond to any instructions to do anything other than slowly walk through the scene. So the other Batman, as you could see, could walk around further backwards, could punch, could kick, and do all those other things. Once Batman's turned into the young Bruce Wayne, he will no longer respond. to any instructions to do anything other than what you can see him doing there. So, back here. I even went through all this yesterday to make sure it worked. Okay, so what did we learn from that very fluid example? Something, I would argue, something there has been represented about Batman's psychological state. As he's gone through this horrific revisiting of the night when his parents died, he has become as a child again. And this is represented by the fact that the avatar has changed to the young Bruce Wayne. But there's also something else, another way that the change in this psychological state has been represented to you. I would argue that the way that Batman responds to your instructions represents the change in his psychological state just as much as the change in the CGI model that represents Batman. And this is what I mean when I say the quality of the interaction itself represents something about Batman's psychological state to the player. This is, you can see this by employing something that I call the sofa test. Now, the sofa test is a way of figuring out whether a representation being made by the video game to the player is a property of the interaction or just a property of the visual or audio, or other kind of representational capacities of the game. So the idea is that you're the player and you're playing this game and you're sitting next to someone else who's just watching you play this game. Any representational features of the game which the player picks up on, which the person sitting next to them who isn't playing doesn't pick up on, you can safely say are uniquely video game-like, if you like, representations, because the person who's just watching the game doesn't have access to this kind of interaction. So this is a phenomenon that I call representation by regulated interaction, and I have a nice complicated diagram to explain this. So here we have a picture of your average gamer, and this is a video game. This is a scene from Uncharted 2. So when the gamer is playing a video game, essentially what they're doing is manipulating the world of the video game. They're interacting with the world of the game. So that line represents their interaction. However, by visual, haptic, linguistic representations, etc. But when an avatar gets put into the mix, then things start to get a bit more complicated because this is a mediated interaction. So in order to interact with the world of the video game, the player has to go through the avatar. So the player's input directs the avatar, it doesn't directly affect the game, and the avatar's action is what affects the world of the video game. So this is where we get a new type of representation, which comes not from the visual, audio, and other features of the game world, but comes from the way that the avatar responds to the player's instructions. So this is, so going back to the Batman example, so the fact that Batman, as the young Bruce Wayne, doesn't stride powerfully through the scene, but instead resignedly shuffles through it. So he's no longer, and this represents, I think, the fact that Batman is no longer the confident superhero, he's just a scared child again. So some things about representation by regulated interaction. It needs a multiply mediated interaction. You couldn't get this kind of representation in something like a real-time strategy game where you're just directly manipulating elements of the world. You need to have to go through a further interactive element that's embedded within the broader interactive world. An interesting consequence of this is that representation by regulated interaction can only represent things about avatars. So you can't represent things about the broader world because it has to do with, because the representation is coming from essentially the avatar's frustration of your intentions to manipulate the broader world of the video game. They can't represent anything about the broader world of the video game, only about themselves. But and you might think that this might be a crippling limitation on representation by regulated interaction, but it's limited only by the number of things that can be avatars, and we all know there are a huge amount of things. So just to take some recent gaming examples, there's a game called Flower or Flower, where the avatar is the player's avatar is a breeze. So by using representation by regulated interaction, I think it's entirely possible that game designers could, in that instance, give the player some kind of very interesting information, if you like, or some very interesting ideas about what it might be like to be a breeze in some sense. And this is something that I hesitatingly call a true first-person perspective, because as compared to first-person literature, where you might get superior access to somebody's, to the narrator's mental states and opinions and views of the narrative, this kind of representation, as opposed to the linguistic representation you get in first-person literature, gives you a real sense of what it's like to be the thing that your avatar is, as opposed to just having reported, because the narrator in first-person literature reports to you what it's like, but in some sense you really get to be that thing. So in summary, to answer a question why video games are art, we must find out what is artistic about the video game, and not just whether particular games happen to be works of art. Avatars make some interaction with some video games multiply mediated, so to interact with the video game world you must interact with a further object embedded within it. This mediation allows the way the avatar responds to player input to represent something about themselves to the player. And this is something that video games, and this is something I'd be willing to argue about in discussion, but I think it's something that only video games can do. I think anything that could do this would essentially be a video game. And a video game, it could be said that a video game that uses this type of representation artistically is artistic because it's a video game. So that brings it back to the beginning. So we wanted to find out something that makes video games that are artworks because they're video games, and I think that this is one way that we could make that case. Okay, thank you very much. And I want to apologise for the technical